2 years after being kicked out of the house, Thaddeus finally remembered me. The reason is that his first love's daughter needs a lot of blood transfusions due to anemia and wants me to sign a blood donation agreement. Serafina, I'll give you 3 minutes to come and donate blood, or don't expect me to forgive you. No response to the message. Thaddeus patiently dialed repeatedly. Before long, Eloan impatiently answered the phone and coldly said, I've told you many times, my mom is already dead. On the other end of the line, Thaddeus was almost exploding with anger. You two are truly disgusting. Why don't you go perform on stage? Tell Serafina not to think she can fool me with such petty tricks. She's really mistaken. This blood bank is only for her. President, no one is coming out. In less than half an hour, the man who had disappeared for over a year blocked his daughter Eloan in the house with 2 rows of bodyguards. Thaddeus nodded. No matter how he knocked, the door remained tightly shut and wouldn't open at all. His gaze was as cold as ice. Just one look could shatter the window. Serafina, don't push your luck. While I'm still being patient, come out quickly. Thaddeus stormed in fiercely, only to find his daughter Eloan alone at home. Everything around was tidy. Eloan shook her head, gently patted with her rash-covered hand, stretched her neck, and coldly glanced around. After a long while, she finally turned her head to glance at him, her eyes full of disdain and dissatisfaction. My mom is already dead. What are you doing here making a fuss? The words were light and airy. Thaddeus was taken aback at first, then he relaxed. He raised an eyebrow, quickly stepped forward, pointed at the small daisies on the dining table, and couldn't help but ask, you liar, who besides Serafina would have the time to arrange such ugly flowers? You're so prone to allergies. Don't tell me you arranged these. It's really selfish to make up such an outrageous lie just to avoid donating blood. It's truly off-putting. He waved his hand, signaling the bodyguards to rush into the bedroom and turn the place upside down. They had to find her, with a reward of 1 million for finding her first. The bodyguards quickly rushed into every room and bathroom, not even sparing the flower pots, instantly turning the place into a mess. Eloan rushed over almost the moment his command was issued, holding little Daisy in her arms. She bit her lip tightly, staring at Thaddeus like a frightened kitten, breathing heavily, her face filled with disbelief, tears streaming down her cheeks. She was already dead. Don't treat her this way. If there is any fault, it's mine. Let me explain. At that time, it was because of Marisol. The bodyguard clearly couldn't find anyone. It's unclear what that person whispered to Thaddeus, but his expression darkened even further as he rushed over, grabbing Eloan's arm and saying sharply, Enough, Eloan. Do you think I will listen to your excuses? 2 years ago, she was petty and allowed you to make mistakes. Hasn't she learned her lesson yet? Even now you're still speaking for her. You really can't see her true nature. I am truly disappointed in you. Indeed, someone like her will never have a good outcome. You shouldn't have any hope for her at all. His eyes were filled with disdain. Unwilling to glance at Eloan again, he threw the blood donation agreement at her and coldly said, Tell her to sign the agreement within 3 days, obediently become Marisol's blood bank to atone for her sins. Otherwise, even if she hides, I will find her. Don't blame me for being ungracious when the time comes. Eloan, this is your last chance. If you still don't understand, I will remove you from the family tree. The Thaddeus family doesn't need descendants like you who are blind to reality. Looking at Thaddeus's contemptuous gaze, Eloan cowered in a corner, her shoulders trembling. My heart ached as I wanted to hold her, but I felt powerless, my hand passing through her shoulder mercilessly. I almost shouted at his retreating figure, You bastard, Thaddeus, I didn't hide. Come back. Apologize to Eloan. Do you think just because you're a man, you can come at me? This is your child. How can you treat her like this? Eloan's eyes were vacant, as if she had lost her sparkle. She trembled as she carefully placed the daisy back, but accidentally knocked over her backpack, spilling out a medical report. She repeatedly touched the scar on her wrist, slowly pointed to her chest, and with a hollow gaze staring into the distance, she revealed a hint of a bitter smile and said, Mom, I got worse after you left. I don't understand why Dad is so hostile towards you, only believing that woman. I want to explain to you, but I feel so powerless. It feels like I'm drowning in seawater, struggling to breathe. I'm really exhausted and just want to be with you. My heart feels like it's being fried in oil, anxious to the point of stomping my feet, wanting to shout but unable to make a sound. I can only watch helplessly as the child curls up, hugging their knees. What should I do? Who can come to save my child? No, baby, remember to live well. I beg you, you must live. 2 years ago, when the two children were playing hide and seek, Marisol accidentally got locked in my car trunk and fell into a deep coma. Thaddeus couldn't take it anymore and immediately kicked me out of the Thaddeus family, accusing me of being too jealous and intentionally letting Aloan get locked in the car, saying I was unworthy of being the mistress of the Thaddeus family. Everyone was blaming me, not even one child could accept it, only Aloan cried beside me, guilt-ridden, saying, "Mom, you did nothing wrong, it's my fault for wanting to play with her, it's my fault that Mom and Dad's relationship got worse, it's all my fault." In the year I was kicked out, no matter how I comforted her, it remained a thorn in her heart. Aloan was stunned for a long time, took out a small medicine bottle, poured out a few pills, and swallowed them directly. 3 days passed quickly, and Thaddeus saw Aloan at the hospital again. On the table, there was still a bottle of mineral water and a few small daisies. Aloan leaned against the bed, silently watching, her face pale, her eyes appearing very tired and helpless. Accompanying Aloan was her homeroom teacher, Mrs. Hawthorne, who gently tucked Aloan's hair behind her ear and whispered some instructions. When Mrs. Hawthorne saw Thaddeus, anger flashed in her eyes. She held up Aloan's examination report, her tone filled with helplessness. "Are you Aloan's father? The child has been depressed for so long, even having thoughts of ending her life. What are you doing as a parent?" Thaddeus rudely snatched Mrs. Hawthorne's report, tore it to shreds without even looking at it, and threw it in Aloan's face. With a cold smile, his words were full of sarcasm. "You and your mother really have endless tricks. Now you even have the money to hire actors to play along? Your mother is truly ruthless, pushing you to play this solo act, and you still act like a fool defending her, which is really heartbreaking." Mrs. Hawthorne stared in shock at Thaddeus and shouted, "How can you treat a child like this? Serafina just passed away, and Aloan hasn't gotten over her grief yet. How can you do this?" Upon hearing this, Thaddeus just glanced at her, pulled out a stack of money from his pocket, threw it in front of Mrs. Hawthorne, and ordered his bodyguard to throw her out. "Enough. Don't let me see you again. Take your money and leave quickly." After Mrs. Hawthorne was taken out, the room returned to silence. Aloan sat there with messy hair, her small frame dressed in an oversized hospital gown. Thaddeus, feeling agitated, tugged at his tie, stared at the small daisies on the table, and said through gritted teeth, "I've warned you not to repeatedly challenge my bottom line. As long as you tell me where she is, you are still your father's daughter and a member of the Thaddeus family. You need to wake up and stop being brainwashed by that wicked woman." When I was mentioned, Aloan's small body began to tremble violently, and tears flowed uncontrollably. In a nearly hoarse voice, she pointed at Marisol, who was dressed in a princess gown, and shouted, "I won't allow you to talk about my mom like that. She's not a wicked woman. She's the best mom in the world. Why can't you understand? I've said it many times, Mom has passed away. Why can't you believe us just this once? Only believe that annoying Marisol." Seeing Aloan directing her anger at Marisol, Thaddeus flashed a look of disgust in his eyes. He shielded Marisol behind him, then raised his hand and slapped Aloan, roaring, "Aloan, don't go too far. You're really pushing me to the edge. Isn't it true that you're not speaking honestly because your mom just passed away? It's really inappropriate for her to teach you to say that." Marisol, who was watching the scene unfold, immediately patted his back, trying to ease the tension. "Thaddeus, don't be angry. Aloan, don't make Dad upset either. You don't know how much Dad cares about you. He's actually doing it for your own good. You should try to understand him more." She pretended to be wronged as she tugged at Thaddeus's shirt corner and began to sob quietly. "Thaddeus, even though I try to get along with my family, I know that since I appeared, Auntie has not liked me. Let's not pressure her anymore. Marisol, it's okay. It's my sudden appearance that upset Auntie. It's all my fault. I don't blame her. It's me who is unwelcome." Seeing Marisol crying sadly, Thaddeus hurriedly wiped her tears and comforted her softly. "It's not your fault, child. Thaddeus didn't handle the family relationships well, and that's why you felt wronged. Dad is sorry for your mom. Good girl, stop crying. Seeing you cry makes Thaddeus's heart ache. Thaddeus understands all the grievances you've suffered over the years and won't let them bully you. You will always be Dad's good daughter. Don't worry, it's not just Serafina who gets to decide who can be a blood donor." With her eyes red and looking pitiful, Marisol said softly, Panda blood is really rare. I can understand Auntie's thoughts. Even if I have blood, it would definitely go to Aloan first, just in case. How could it save me? With Dad saying that, Marisol felt satisfied. My dad treats me so well, I'm not afraid of death. I just hope to spend the remaining time with you. Hearing this, my heart jolted, and my body uncontrollably slid to the ground. I clasped my hands together, hoping Thaddeus still had a conscience. But when I heard what he said, my heart instantly sank. I covered my mouth and looked up to see Aloan, equally shocked, as tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. Thaddeus tightly embraced Marisol, seeming to feel guilty. He said, "Child, it's Thaddeus's fault. Your mother entrusted you to me, and I will definitely take good care of you." After saying that, he coldly instructed the bodyguard and smugly looked at Aloan, telling them to check if the hospital had any blood bags from Serafina. If so, give it to Marisol first. If not, draw blood from Aloan. Serafina, no matter where you are hiding, if you don't show up, I will draw blood from your daughter. I want to see if you can be so ruthless to your own flesh and blood. I never expected the soul could also feel pain. It felt like my heart was being squeezed. I rushed towards Thaddeus, wanting to question him on why he was using me to hurt Aloan. Why treat her this way? She is also his biological daughter. She is also in tears. Doesn't he feel any pain in his heart? Aloan on the bed said nothing, only looking at Thaddeus with a cold, indifferent gaze for the first time. A year ago, I had a car accident on the way to take the kids to school, and I felt an ominous premonition. I tried to keep my strength and called Thaddeus, hoping he could bring Aloan back to the Thaddeus family because she really needs him now. I called more than 10 times before finally getting through. He said, "Aren't you quite capable? Why do you want to compete for affection again now? Serafina, I don't care about you at all. Whether you live or die has nothing to do with me. It would be better if you just died out there. I'm warning you, don't call me again." Marisol's leg was injured and has already been sent to the hospital. If anything happens to Marisol because of the delay, I will not let you off. Aloan cried as she knelt on the ground, banging her head against the phone, blood streaming from her forehead. "Dad, please come see Mom. This is her last wish." But the person on the other end hung up directly. I have not seen Thaddeus at all. When I was taken to the crematorium, Aloan didn't say a word, not a single tear fell. But I knew she was holding a lot inside. Late at night, she dragged her exhausted body home. That child has always been afraid of the dark, yet she didn't turn on the light. Scalding tears dripped onto the floor, and the seemingly mature child finally tore off the disguise, first sobbing, then breaking down in tears. "President, there is no stored blood for the madam at the hospital, but the doctor said Aloan is too young, it's not allowed." Thaddeus sneered, coldly staring at Aloan. "Just draw her blood, it won't kill her. Marisol can't wait much longer." After saying that, he reached out and patted Marisol's head, a look of satisfaction on his face. I was anxiously pacing back and forth. Aloan had been taking antidepressants. Her blood surely wouldn't meet the standards. Drawing blood would only make her weaker. But Aloan remained silent, with a dazed expression as they used a thick needle to pierce her skin. At the moment Thaddeus received the blood test report, he erupted in anger. "What on earth did you add to the blood? Just like your mother, selfish and vicious. I shouldn't have had any expectations for you. The Thaddeus family doesn't need descendants like you. From today on, you are disowned, and I will no longer pay any expenses for you, including tuition." My heart ached suddenly, my soul trembled, kneeling on the ground pleading, "Don't treat Aloan this way. She is our only blood. I will also feel sad and upset. I beg you to consider her feelings." Upon hearing this, Aloan was stunned for a moment, silently picked up her backpack, holding the small daisies, and finally revealed a smile on her pale face. "In your eyes, my mother and I are nothing at all. Congratulations, Thaddeus. From now on you will only have Marisol as your daughter." Thaddeus found this amusing after hearing it. He lowered his head, clenched his fists, and intentionally elongated his voice, saying, "Do you think you can escape like this? Come here, check for me. I want to see what drugs she is hiding." 5 or 6 bodyguards stepped forward together, pinned her down, and began to search her pockets, snatching the backpack from her hands. A small daisy fell to the ground, and items from the backpack started dropping one by one, scattering everywhere, textbooks, a small carving knife, various bottles, and even a black and white portrait of the deceased. The most eye-catching was a brand new, bright cremation certificate that fell right at Thaddeus's feet. "What is this?" He squinted, staring at Eloan for a few seconds, frowning as he opened it. It clearly stated the deceased's name, Serafina. Eloan laughed until tears streamed down her face. Thaddeus was momentarily stunned, glaring at Eloan in anger, and asked, "What are you laughing at? What is this? Why does it have your mother's name on it? Speak up!" Seeing that something was off, Marisol came over to take a look, pulled out a stack of items from her small bag, and said softly, "So this is what it is. I have a lot of these." She squatted down, looking through the scattered items, and asked, "There's no death certificate. Where did you get this fake one?" Upon hearing it was a fake certificate, Thaddeus visibly relaxed a lot. Marisol turned around and scolded Eloan loudly, "Sister, you are being too much. How can you treat Thaddeus like this? He will be worried." Then, she stepped forward, took Thaddeus's hand, and said with concern, "Thaddeus, don't be too harsh. Your sister is scared and crying. She didn't mean it. It was just a little joke." Marisol shifted the focus of the issue onto Eloan, thinking she was deliberately putting on a show. Thaddeus's disdain was unmistakable as he heard this. Furious, he grabbed Eloan's shoulders and shook her wildly, asking, "Eloan, have you had enough of this? Have you really had enough?" Eloan stared blankly at him, witnessing her father stomp on her medicine and throw it into the trash. It still didn't seem enough. He desperately tore the cremation certificate to shreds, then smashed the daisies, and finally pushed Eloan to the ground, yelling, "It's all ruined. Let's see how you all mess around now. You really disgust me. Get out. Get out right now." Eloan's skin scraped against the ground, but she had no time to care. She immediately lunged for the daisies that had been thrown to the ground. Mom, I'm sitting on the ground, trying to pick her up, but I just can't reach. The pain in my heart feels like a knife stabbing me. I truly can't understand why I can't bear all of this." Marisol stepped on the daisies, bent down, and her eyes revealed an indescribable pride. "Eloan, you better not make Daddy angry." Seeing that Eloan didn't respond, Marisol pretended to help her out, but just outside the door, she had the bodyguard throw her out. "She thinks she's a princess. I really don't understand why she has to act so delicate. Being hated by Daddy to this extent, she still has the face to live in this world. It's truly shameless. It feels like my heart is being torn apart. Mom is powerless and can only watch her get bullied. I really feel so helpless. What should Mom do? And what about my Eloan?" Tears fell onto the crumpled daisies as Eloan quietly cried, "Mom, I'm sorry for not being able to protect you well. It's all my fault." Eloan can't hold on any longer. She looked very tired, tightly holding on to the money as she went to the cemetery. I was stunned because she said she wanted to be with Mom forever. The Thaddeus family's daughter fainted at the business dinner. It is said that Thaddeus spent a lot of money hiring the city's top doctors to treat his daughter and promised a reward of $1 million if they could save Marisol. The newspapers are reporting Thaddeus's efforts to build a good father image, which suddenly caused his stocks to soar. The doctor said Marisol is severely anemic and recommended immediate blood transfusions, otherwise, the lack of blood could cause organ damage. Thaddeus was so anxious that he couldn't eat or sleep, and before dawn, he crawled out of the window to bring Eloan back to the Thaddeus family, wanting to draw her blood. He is completely indifferent to his biological daughter Eloan, hasn't had money for antidepressants in a long time, hasn't truly slept, and doesn't care about the suffering Eloan is enduring, still continuing to pressure her. Since that venomous woman isn't showing up, let her daughter bear the burden instead. Marisol, just hang in there a little longer. Daddy will save you. Watching all of this, I really want to drive them away. My poor daughter, Eloan. Thaddeus, I didn't expect you to be so heartless. Outside the room, Eloan witnessed the deep bond between father and son. She felt numb and had no reaction, bypassing them and heading towards the secret passage to escape this home. Eloan came alone to the cemetery, picked a bunch of daisies from beside a grave, and placed them on my tombstone. She hugged her knees, leaning in front of my grave, her hands swollen like a little bun from touching the daisies. It felt like a hemp rope was tightly pulling at my heart, rendering me speechless, only able to listen quietly. Mom, do you like these daisies? I like them quite a bit. I planted all of them myself. You see, I bought a plot next to yours. I will be with you from now on, and we will never be apart, okay? Tears quietly fell as she turned around to kiss my tombstone, a happy smile appearing on her face. I'm sorry, Mom. I feel like I can't hold on any longer. This world has robbed me of hope, and there's no one who loves me. We should be able to see each other again soon. I haven't fulfilled the promise I made back then. You won't blame me when you see me, right? I couldn't help but gasp, realizing there was a dagger next to her. Child, you are hurting your mother's heart. I cried until I could hardly make a sound, nagging her as I circled around. Mom wants you to live well. You promised her that day after the accident. How can you easily go back on your word? Not far away, Marisol suddenly rushed out, though I didn't know when. Aloan, you are truly unfair. Not only won't you help me with a blood transfusion, but you also want to take my things. I had my eye on this gravesite long ago. On what grounds do you say you can just take it? She stood on my tombstone, hands on her hips, crushing a couple of daisies, looking down at Aloan. You buried that old woman here? Pa, she deserves it. Because of her, my mom could never marry the person she wanted. She truly deserves to die. She only deserves to be a wandering spirit. I must get this grave today. A flicker of anger flashed in Aloan's eyes, her voice cold and harsh. Apologize. Marisol, you have targeted me for so many years, and I have endured it. I can overlook the grievances, but you cannot insult my mother like this. But Marisol seems unbothered and continues to direct the others. Dig up the grave, and you'll be richly rewarded. No sooner had she finished speaking than Aloan nearly exploded. She grabbed Marisol's hair and slammed her against the tombstone, repeatedly smashing her head against the steps. I told you to apologize. Are you deaf? Marisol's forehead was marked with several blood streaks, but Aloan seemed unwilling to stop. Stop it! What are you doing? Thaddeus was shocked by the scene before him. Aloan had always been obedient in front of him, and he had never seen her this angry. He hurriedly picked up Marisol, holding her tenderly, then forcefully pushed Aloan against the tombstone, enough to instill fear. Aloan's head also hit, and blood flowed freely. Aloan, are you out of your mind? Do you know you're committing a crime? Marisol leaned weakly in his arms, tears streaming down her face. Dad, I really don't know what I did wrong. My sister wants to hurt me. She even stole the things Mom left for me this morning, trying to hide them here. Thaddeus, you need to help me come up with a plan. Thaddeus took a couple of angry steps forward and sarcastically said, this tombstone actually looks quite impressive. So, are you not only acting but also stealing now? Are you trying to make a profit in the name of the dead from my Thaddeus family? I was going to give you a chance to correct yourselves, but it seems there's no need for that now. You aren't worth it. He expressionlessly pointed at the two of them. You two, dig and see what valuable things are hidden inside that could land you years in prison. Aloan, ignoring her head injury, screamed as she tried to intervene, but was kicked in the chest and pushed aside. Soon, they unearthed a brand new black box, surrounded by dried flowers with small daisies. Thaddeus weighed it in his hand, a smile flashing in his eyes. It was quite heavy. He was eager to open the box and see what was inside. Why is it all dirt? Thaddeus, irritated, threw the small box to the ground. It was really infuriating. Just then, a gust of wind blew, and a thin piece of paper from inside the box floated right onto his face. It's a death certificate. Patient Serafina, 35 years old, female, was admitted due to a serious car accident and unfortunately passed away on July 23, 2084, at 8:28 a.m. A warm family photo quietly sits nearby. Thaddeus turned to Aloan with vacant eyes, his voice trembling. Aloan, this isn't real, right? Mom always said she would live a long life, and she also said that if anyone were to die, it would be me first. How could this happen? Aloan seemed to lose all her strength, covering her chest as she coughed up blood. Glaring at Thaddeus with resentment, she said slowly, Mom, I was never a good child. I will never forgive you. Thaddeus, I hate you. I hope you fall into the depths of hell forever and can never rise again. After saying that, she tore the family photo to shreds and turned to leave. Just as she walked out of the cemetery, a large truck suddenly came rushing in, knocking her several meters away. A few steps away, Thaddeus watched in shock, hoarsely shouting. Thaddeus sat in the hospital, staring at the surgery board, dazed for an entire day and night. He hasn't had time to accept the fact of his wife's death, and now the child is in the operating room. Thaddeus is holding the family photo torn to pieces by Aloan, trying to piece it back together. tears continuously falling on the picture. This photo was taken 5 years ago when the whole family returned from vacation in Hawaii, with me nestled in his arms and Aloan smiling beside us, tugging at his ear. At that time, he was the happiest person in the world. His wife was beautiful and charming, everything at home was well taken care of, and he had a lovely daughter who always smiled and cared for him. At the cemetery, for the first time, he saw the hatred in his daughter's eyes, feeling as if something was pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. With vacant eyes, he stared at the operating room. In just a year or two, that wife who used to revolve around him had died in a car accident. How did the daughter who once loved to snuggle beside him and share everything become so cold? Dad, I declare that we are the best in the world, so you must always protect Aloan. Dad, can you hug me? As his memories gradually blurred, he suddenly realized that since Marisol appeared, he hadn't properly cared for Aloan. The doctor's questions echoed in his mind. The patient's medical history. How could you know nothing? Are you really the patient's father? The patient's life is in danger, with multiple cuts on her wrists, a history of depression, and a very weak will to survive. Aloan is sick, but she never told me. At that moment, he realized he had cared very little for Aloan, not even seeing his wife for the last time. Thaddeus held his head in pain, his voice hoarse. Serafina, it's all my fault. I didn't take care of you, nor did I take care of Aloan. You must be suffering. You probably hate me. This was the first time in 5 years he affectionately called my name like this. I helplessly watched the scene in front of me, my nose feeling a bit sour. That's right, I really hate you to the point of madness. You let her hurt my daughter again and again. You are not worthy of being my child's father. Marisol stood in the corner, looking smugly at the operating room. She thoughtfully brought a lunch box and patted his back, saying, Dad, don't worry too much, sister will be fine. Let's wait for the doctor to come out and ask, what if this is just a joke? Thaddeus furrowed his brow slightly, shifted his body a bit, keeping some distance from her, and was about to say something. At this moment, the operating room light turned on, and the doctor solemnly asked, who has Rh-negative blood type? The patient is temporarily out of danger but still needs observation. They may need a blood transfusion in 24 hours. Thaddeus finally felt a weight lift from his heart, sighed in relief, pushed Marisol in front of the doctor, and said firmly, she has panda blood, thank you. Marisol stood there in a daze, rubbing her ears and staring at the man in shock. Moreover, she also has anemia, which Thaddeus knows. I scoffed silently, remembering how every time Marisol got hurt, Thaddeus would always hold her and comfort her for a long time. As long as it was something Marisol liked, he would force Aloan to give it to her. He could never bear to let Marisol suffer even a little. Aloan always put up with her own grievances just to satisfy Marisol. But now, he was actually willing to let a thick needle pierce Marisol's arm. What a surprise! A flicker of malice passed through Marisol's eyes. Then she sweetly said, Thaddeus, what are you talking about? Of course I want to save my sister, but you know my health condition. I couldn't help but laugh. Marisol thought she could deceive Thaddeus, but she forgot about his abilities. In fact, an hour ago, he had already received the medical report from her private doctor, which showed that she was only mildly anemic. After forcibly interrogating the attending physician, the doctor admitted that Marisol had paid him to alter the medical report. Thaddeus looked at her, tears welling in his eyes. I don't want to discuss this right now, you just need to answer. Do you want to save Aloan? Marisol had never seen Thaddeus so cold. Suddenly, seeing the pile of medical reports on the chair made her feel flustered, and she hurriedly nodded, saying, I do. Then, Marisol was taken by the nurse to have a lot of blood drawn. However, when Aloan woke up, she immediately refused Marisol's blood. She was filled with hatred, not wanting that filthy blood to flow into her body. More than a dozen medical staff came in turn to persuade her, but all were refused. Thaddeus didn't give up, persistently coaxing and pleading for her to accept. The stubborn Aloan directly cut the blood bag apart and threw it into the toilet. I was anxiously pacing in place, but there was nothing I could do. I watched as the blood bag spun around in the toilet before being completely flushed away. In the corner, Marisol gritted her teeth and said, Aloan, why are you still alive? You truly deserve a terrible fate. Since waking up, Aloan's mental state has been deteriorating. Her depression worsened after stopping medication, and she often felt dizzy, fatigued, and had palpitations. Continuing like this for a long time could lead to many complications. She accidentally fell while going to the bathroom in the morning, resulting in bruises and swelling. The doctor said her condition was severe, and time was likely running out. I collapsed on the ground, crying uncontrollably, "Eloan, my Eloan. It's my fault as a mother for not being able to protect you, leaving you to bear all this alone." Thaddeus stayed by her side, softly comforting her, asking for her forgiveness. "I'm sorry, Eloan. I didn't do well, letting you go through so much alone. It's my fault. Dad knows you're upset. You can hit me or curse me. As long as you can forgive me, I'm willing to do anything." He tried to reach out to hold her hand, but she pulled away. Eloan glared at him and asked word by word, "Is Thaddeus joking? Do you think you're worth my forgiveness? On the day of the car accident a year ago, I knelt on the ground begging you to see me and Mom. That was my mom's last wish. What did you say back then? Do I need to remind you? You said it would be better if you all died outside. Haha, has Thaddeus forgotten so quickly?" Thaddeus's eyes widened instantly, his body trembled violently, and he suddenly began to slap his own face. "It's all my fault. I'm sorry. I really didn't know. I truly didn't know." Eloan irritably turned her face away. "You hurt me for Marisol back then, and now you come to ask for my forgiveness. Do you know how little self-respect you have? Please keep Thaddeus away from me. You should know that only Marisol is your daughter now." Thaddeus looked dazed, his eyes filled with pleading. "You're right, Dad was wrong. It was Dad who hurt you first. You are Dad's most beloved daughter. Please give him a chance. Dad is willing to do anything for you." This absurdity made Eloan unable to hold back a laugh as she pointed at the thick bandage on her head. "All right then, let me see just how much you love me." Thaddeus's face turned pale as he softly said, "Dad only hopes for your happiness." After saying that, he suddenly slammed into the corner of the table. I stood in the shadow of the hospital room, watching the scene, unable to help but smile at myself. This is what he should bear. Eloan was right, he really was being unreasonable. Eloan's annoyance towards Thaddeus was becoming increasingly evident. She would suddenly throw a pillow at him, yelling for him to get out. She would also inexplicably rush into the bathroom and dump all the food she had made herself. As long as there was any sign of wanting treatment, Thaddeus would immediately send someone to draw Marisol's blood, only for it to be flushed away again. This happened repeatedly several times. Thaddeus had no complaints about it and accepted it completely, but Marisol struggled a lot. He seemed to have transformed back into the dad who could tolerate all of Eloan's little moods. Sometimes when Eloan smiled at the little Daisy, he would smile along, and when she cried, he would shed tears too. He gradually understood the special meaning the little Daisy held for her, so he thoughtfully changed the water for the little Daisy. But Eloan was not buying it. She threw the food she was eating directly at him, glaring at him with anger. "Who told you to touch it? What right do you have to touch it? Get out!" Thaddeus stood there in shock, looking at the stains on him, and finally reacted, stuttering, "Why yes, I'm sorry. The doctor said you can't get too worked up. Please don't be angry. I won't touch it again. I'm really sorry." He cautiously backed out, afraid of upsetting her. Eloan's emotions were getting more and more out of control, and she was in a very bad state, not feeling well at all. The doctor said it was best to find things that evoke a sense of attachment in her memories. Thaddeus excitedly handed the crumpled family photo, which he had taped together with clear tape, to Eloan. Eloan smiled slightly and ruthlessly threw it into the fire to burn. She laughed at the flames for a long time. I sat behind her, tears streaming down my face, understanding that she had made up her mind. At the moment Eloan's life signs disappeared, I heard Thaddeus's heart-wrenching cry. He said, "Serafina, Eloan, I will definitely find you in the next life and make up for everything." I felt a wave of fear, thinking only of each being well and not meeting again. I casually lit a fire and burned a few pieces of ash. Eloan left without leaving anything for Thaddeus. The hospital contacted Eloan's homeroom teacher, Mrs. Hawthorne, to take her urn. According to her wishes, the ashes were all scattered into the sea. For the next 2 weeks, Thaddeus stopped Mrs. Hawthorne every day on her way home, hoping she would return Eloan's ashes so he could bury her in the Thaddeus family graveyard. Having lost his beloved wife, he didn't want to lose his only daughter as well. He was already in despair, even kneeling on the ground, pleading loudly, "This is my daughter, no one can take her away. I beg you, have mercy on me and return her to me." Mrs. Hawthorne thought of his previous arrogant demeanor and didn't want to pay him much attention. Seeing this, Thaddeus directly hugged her leg and insisted on handing her a processed family photo, saying, "Our family of 3 should always be together. Please, just let her have a memory of Aloan." At first, Mrs. Hawthorne tried to reason with him, but gradually realized he simply couldn't understand. Unable to tolerate it any longer, she shouted for security to throw him out. "Mr. Thaddeus, why put on a show in front of me? If you truly feel sorry for her and her daughter, go investigate the truth of the car accident from a year ago and see how they have lived all these years. Here is a tape. If you still have a shred of conscience, give them an explanation." The tape is about the dashcam footage of the car accident from a year ago. What's even more devastating is discovering that this was not a simple accident, but a premeditated murder. The vehicle had already been tampered with. He could hardly believe what he saw and brought in more detectives to investigate the entire incident. The outcome was still heartbreaking. Tears, fear, and torment enveloped everything, as if immersed in shadows. Seeing the scene of the accident again through the videotape still filled me with fear. The car suddenly lost its brakes while driving, and the oncoming truck seemed to come rushing at us. I saw Aloan, equally panicked beside me, and had a sudden idea to push her out with the force of inertia, hoping to protect her as much as possible. I suddenly turned the steering wheel to avoid the truck's collision. I still had things to say to Thaddeus. I hoped he could let go of his prejudices against Aloan and take care of her for life. I didn't want to die now. I struggled to catch my breath and finally called him. Unfortunately, I overestimated my position in his heart. He didn't even want to see me. The rift between us was ultimately caused by Marisol. My heart was full of grievances, tears streaming down, wishing he would treat our daughter well. It felt like my heart was being pierced by needles. In the moments of blurred vision, I could only helplessly watch Aloan, silently enduring the loss. Thaddeus could barely sleep soundly. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind was filled with his wife's and daughter's discontent. Aloan and I left nothing behind. Thaddeus, feeling unwilling, donated 2 libraries, the Aloan Library and Serafina Hall. He clearly knew we hated him to death, yet still insisted on keeping us this way. He had someone bring Marisol over, tied up. At this moment, Marisol was still unaware of the truth. She had drawn a lot of blood and looked very pale. Upon seeing Thaddeus, tears immediately welled up, and she rushed into his arms, feeling wronged. "Thaddeus, Marisol's wrist really hurts. Can you blow on it for me? The doctor said my anemia is quite severe this time. My sister is really unreasonable, always causing a scene. You used to treat me the best. Can you please help me?" Mentioning me visibly increased Thaddeus's anger. His expression was blank, his tone steady. He chuckled lightly. "Marisol, have I treated you well?" Marisol instinctively nodded, her tone sincere and her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thaddeus is the best person I've ever had in my life. After my mother passed away, I was sent to an orphanage, and it was you who adopted me and brought me home. You are my benefactor." Thaddeus closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, his eyes were already red. In the next moment, he slapped her hard, his gaze turning cold as he suppressed his emotions and shouted, "Is this how you repay your savior? Why are you trying so hard to frame my wife and daughter? I treated you so well, like my own daughter, but what about you? Even if you pretend to be sick, I understand that you want more love, but you actually caused Serafina's death, and now you want to harm Aloan." Marisol was knocked to the ground, a small bead of blood oozing from the corner of her mouth. Thaddeus threw a pile of evidence on the ground, grabbed her by the neck in anger, saying, "You really deserve to die. No one can bully my Aloan. That car accident was also caused by you, wasn't it? You even wanted me to witness the accident. You really should go accompany her now." He tightened his grip, and Marisol was almost out of breath. She desperately kicked Thaddeus a few times before he finally let go. Marisol gasped for air, looked up at Thaddeus with a fierce glare, thinking about how shameless her mother and she were for taking away the person her mother loved most. They truly deserved to die. She was like a madwoman. Thaddeus looked at her in disbelief, shaking his head excitedly, and said loudly, "My relationship with your mother is innocent. Don't act so heartless." Marisol coughed twice, seemingly finding it amusing, and sat on the ground laughing out loud. "Innocent? That's hilarious. You still have feelings for my mom deep down. That's why you keep hurting your wife and daughter while raising someone else's daughter. That old woman and Aloan will never forgive you. Wasn't it you who drove them out of the house, giving me the opportunity? You're the one who let them die out there, aren't you? I'm helping you. This is all my doing. So what? It must feel terrible to be hated by your wife and daughter, right? Ha ha ha. Thaddeus wanted to refute, but ultimately couldn't say anything. Marisol laughed more and more happily. Thaddeus, you only have me as your daughter now. Don't think about sending me to prison. Who will take care of you in the future? Wake up. That person is already gone. Isn't it too late to seek revenge for her now? You are the biggest culprit. How despairing it must be for them to have a husband and father like you. You caused their deaths. The sound of sirens grew closer. The evidence is conclusive. Marisol is wearing a silver bracelet. As she brushed past Thaddeus, she gave him a provocative smile. Remember, you made my life difficult, and I won't make it easy for you. Thaddeus was filled with regret, tears in his eyes, quietly sobbing. Serafina, can you forgive me? He finally realized how big of a mistake he made, but it was already too late to turn back. I looked coldly at Thaddeus, who was slumped on the ground, holding his knees and shedding painful tears. Our family has finally drifted further apart. Marisol didn't give up and posted a video before going to prison. In the video, Thaddeus repeatedly hit Eloane, kicked her medicine bottle away, and even hurled harsh words at his wife and daughter, asking them why they hadn't gone to die yet. At the end of the video, it showed Eloane's severely injured wrist and my death certificate. The fact that Thaddeus personally sent his adopted daughter to prison caused a huge uproar. Overnight, the image of the good father completely collapsed. The stock market plummeted that night, and the company declared bankruptcy. Thaddeus returned home in a daze, faced with the chaotic scene he had created. In the dead of night, the window was drafty, and the cold wind howled through the living room. He could imagine how cold the house would have been when the windows were smashed that night, and the once delicate Eloane curled up in the corner, crying and holding her head. Thaddeus somewhat numbly opened the drawer, which quietly held a diary and a knife. October X, 2080. The weather is nice. Today I went on vacation to Hawaii with my parents. Dad would hold me like a little airplane and fly. It was so much fun. Dad and I are the best pair in the world. October X, 2080. The weather is great. Today I saw Dad give Mom a little daisy. They really are in love. In the future, I want to marry someone like Dad. The flowers are so beautiful, I couldn't help but pick one, but I ended up being allergic. Dad was really angry. October X, 2081. Overcast. Dad brought back a little girl. She's thin and very small. He told me to take good care of her, saying she just lost her mom. It really breaks my heart. I shared my favorite snacks with her, hoping it would make her a bit happier. October X, 2082. Heavy rain. Dad is flying with Marisol in his arms. I'm feeling down. October X, 2082. It's drizzling. It was clearly Marisol's fault. Why is Dad getting mad at me? I'm starting to not like him, unless he flies with me again. February X, 2082. It's drizzling. I'm angry. I found that Marisol always goes against Mom. She always acts cute with Dad. Clearly, I'm the one who is more wronged. I don't like her anymore. February X, 2083. It's pouring outside. I feel like Dad doesn't love me anymore. February X, 2083. It's drizzling. Marisol ruined the little dress Mom bought for me. Not only did Dad not scold her, but he also got angry with me. He doesn't believe me. So annoying. I also find Dad annoying. February X, 2083. The weather is gloomy. Dad and Mom had a huge fight. It's all my fault for accidentally locking Marisol in the car. I never want to play hide and seek again. February X, 2083. In the pouring rain, Mom and I were kicked out. I don't want to be separated from Dad. I hope they can reconcile soon. I truly love him. October X, 2083. Overcast. I haven't seen Dad for a long time. Has he forgotten that he has a daughter? October X, 2084. Overcast. I feel like I'm getting sick. October X, 2084. It's pouring rain. The person who loves me the most is gone. I feel really hurt inside. October X, 2084. It's pouring rain. I feel so tired. I can barely hold on. No one in this world loves me. October X, 2084. Heavy rain. I'm sorry, Mom. I couldn't protect you well. I really hate him. I will never forgive him. I hope he gets the worst retribution. October X, 2084. Torrential rain. I just want to leave quickly. In the darkness, Thaddeus lowered his head, first sobbing softly, then completely losing control and crying out loud. He stared at the knife in the drawer, hesitating not at all as he repeatedly cut into his wrist, wanting to experience the pain that Aloan once endured. Blood kept pouring out, and he weakly said, "Aloan, I'm sorry. Dad will take good care of you in the next life. I came to find you." And in the room, Aloan, who saw all this, looked disdainful and turned her face away in annoyance. I smiled and pinched her little face, still sad. "He said he would make it up to you in the next life." Aloan pouted, looking very unhappy, saying it would be best if they never met again. Does Mom still want to choose him as her husband in the next life? There's no need. A wave of regret washed over me. I really don't know how I chose him back then. While thinking about this, Aloan, wearing a princess dress, held a small daisy and clung to my arm, saying, "Mom, Aloan brought you your favorite daisies. Let's hurry, or we'll miss the heaven cruise." I happily pinched her little face and said, Okay, I'll listen to you."